Welcome back to another episode of Transforming IT. I'm your host, Patrick Pahls, and today we're going to be talking about blockchain. I'm not an expert in blockchain, but I have one of my counterparts here, Matt DiBona. We're going to have him teach us a little bit or talk a little bit about blockchain. But before we dive in, I wanted to give Matt a opportunity to introduce himself.
Well, thanks, Patrick. For those who aren't familiar with me, my name is Matthew DiBona. I'm a director at Smartbridge in our digital innovations practice. And what that allows me to do is really take a look out on the horizon of what technologies are just about there, what technologies are a little further out than just around the corner, and figure out how we can start working with those technologies internally, and then how can we apply those to help our clients improve their business. And so blockchain is one that over the past year I've focused a lot more attention. One, because you hear about it all the time, right? You hear about it in terms of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all of those things. And I don't think that's necessarily where the big play is for enterprises. I think blockchain has lots of applications outside of the cryptocurrency space. So I hope to be able to dive into some of those with you today.
All right. Well, I mean, that leads us into question number one is, what exactly is blockchain? Can you give me the 5,000-foot overview and kind of give a little bit of a basic understanding for us people that don't really know a whole lot about it?
Sure. Well, blockchain, in short, is a distributed digital ledger. So if you think back to humans over time, we've always been really good at saying mine, right?
Fair enough.
Everybody wants to claim ownership, and we've done that over time in different ways, whether it was clay tablets, and then we moved into paper and double entry bookkeeping and spreadsheets and ERP. And so now where we are is blockchain really offers the promise of kind of that next innovation cycle. And so in terms of what it is, like I said, a distributed digital ledger. So a ledger just like you have in any other enterprise application, but it's distributed, meaning it's not sitting on a database in one company's data center. It's sitting on multiple computers, nodes in a network that really sits in the internet. So it's truly decentralized.
Well, coming from infrastructure/IT background, it really makes me happy to see something that's not, if anything happens, any piece of the node or any portion of it goes down, everything else still is up and running, and it's much harder to kill. And when it comes to business data and my money in general, that seems like a pretty good application of the technology.
Agreed. Yeah, the distributed nature of blockchain does offer it, really this prevention of a single point of failure. There's multiple thousands of nodes on either the Bitcoin or the Ethereum network, which are two of the biggest blockchain networks currently. But there are other benefits that the blockchain also offers beyond just kind of this, you can't take it down by taking down a database.
Well, I'm also assuming that the distributed nature also has some inherent layer of security, because you can't get access to everything at once and corrupt or change or basically break the blockchain. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, it is. That's we refer to that to immutability. It's immutable, meaning it can't be changed just by simply changing one computer's version of that ledger. That ledger is propagated across the entire network, and the nodes themselves look to validate whether a new block that a different node has put onto the network is legitimate. And if somebody decided to try to change it, they wouldn't be able to do that because of the very nature of how the blocks are chained together. So just a quick aside on kind of how the technology works. A block is a collection of transactions that have been propagated across this network. The block is then validated, meaning the transactions inside of it are legit. This actor is trying to move this asset to this other participant, and is it okay, right? Do they have the actual asset to transfer? So there's the validation, and then there's something in Ethereum and Bitcoin called proof of work, which is a mathematical proof that is kind of a hard math problem that these computers solve. They're the mining computers. You've probably heard about mining. And they basically are the ones that are saying there is enough computing power in this network, and there's this competition that means any one actor doesn't control the network. So with a block and these transactions in it, there's a cryptographic signature that is placed inside of subsequent blocks. And cryptographic signature of that block is inserted into the next block. And so the way that these are strung together, if you were to change, let's say I gave you 2 Bitcoin. Well, I wanted to change it to you gave me 2 Bitcoin, right? To change the transaction. To do that, you'd not only have to change that one block, but you would have to change every other block subsequent to that. And not just on one machine, you'd have to change it simultaneously on all the other nodes on the network. And so the distributed nature, even if these different nodes don't trust each other, you inherently get this trust. It's almost kind of a digital mutually assured destruction.
Fair enough. Well, let's think about it a different way. Not mutually assured destruction, but kind of like a majority rules type of thing, right?
Consensus.
A general consensus.
Yes,
okay.
That is a better way to put it.
All right, so bringing it back up a little bit from the kind of technology, the deep dive into the kind of the technology and the how-to, I want to talk about business and how blockchain can really affect business, the benefits of it, and where we see it going. I recently read something from Gartner that said blockchain will be largely proof of concepts until about 2020, and then from there we'll start seeing a slow transition into it actually building business value. Now, it's kind of one of those things. It's Gartner, so what they say is probably fairly accurate. I mean, they are Gartner after all, and that's what they do. But what I was wondering is, given your experience and the research you've done into it and your expertise, whether or not you agree with that, and then from there, when do you actually see these proof of concepts actually bringing some type of business value back to the business?
Yeah, so I think Gartner has it right. Most companies that are beginning to kind of go down that blockchain road are doing so cautiously, and that's probably the right move, given that these networks are all relatively new. There's a lot of learning that's happened in some of the early networks with Bitcoin and Ethereum. They don't transact at the high velocity like a Visa credit card network, right? We're talking about tens or maybe hundreds of transactions per second, where in reality, the volumes that true enterprise class implementations require could be significantly higher than that. So while companies are starting to understand the technology itself and thinking about, well, where are the areas of my business that maybe a blockchain type technology could fit? Meanwhile, the technology itself is maturing, right? So we're at the beginning, even though, Bitcoin and Ethereum and others have been around for, 2, 3, 5, 8 years, right? It's still really new. Like, this is the beginning of the internet almost again. And so, it's appropriate that companies are cautious as they move into the blockchain space. The other thing I'll mention is, with smart contracts, and maybe we'll dive into those a little bit later, smart contracts do offer the promise of disintermediation, really taking out that middleman and automating some things that maybe are currently manual. And this is an example of how automation is starting to change how businesses are thinking, but it's not going to happen instantaneously. So the functions within an ERP aren't instantly going to move over to the blockchain and you can toss out your JD Edwards implementation, right? It's going to take time to get there, and as people establish more trust and comfort in the network, they'll start to migrate more and more capabilities to the blockchain.
All right, fair enough. So we already discussed a little bit about how blockchain works and how it transacts and builds the chain and things like that. But how about we dive into a couple of case studies? So you talked about cryptocurrencies several different times, but and you also mentioned smart contracts. But one of the things I really want to focus on, and I think this is one of the kind of the up and coming that I've heard a lot of different people talking about, is food traceability. They talk about knowing every step of the way where your food is from, the farm to table. I mean, that's a big thing right now, right? Farm to table food at restaurants, and they upcharge you 30% just because they say that. But this actually gives us that insight that allows us to see where this food is, or where these items or ingredients are every step of the way. But could you kind of expand a little bit more on how that would be used in a practical sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think the food industry, it's got, just like several supply chain oriented industries, they have a complex supply chain. It isn't just farm to table, right? There's a lot of, often, unless you're buying it from a farmer's market, there's often middlemen along the way, whether it's transportation companies or if it's food processing companies, grocery stores, restaurants, right? There's, even in the most simple value chain in the food industry, there's still people involved. And really, I think the big thing about the food industry, like any other supply chain or logistics use case, is that people want to be able to trust the source. They want to be able to trust all of the participating parties along the way. And you mentioned an increase in price because it is farm to table. Well, consumers are willing to do that, right? If they trust their food source and they trust the process by which the food was handled and ethically and all of that, it will warrant a higher price tag. And so within the supply chain space, the devil's in the details. And I won't lie to you that there's a lot that is being figured out. There's several pilots going on currently. IBM has several pilots going on with Walmart and a larger consortium of food producers and processors, as well as retailers. And so, a lot of these challenges on what is the right unit of measure. Do we measure things by the avocado? Do we measure them by the crate of avocados? What level of detail on where something came from is good enough, right? So there's all these questions that are being worked out through the process. But I do think supply chain is a really, the FDA saying you only need to keep track of, as a participant in this food value chain, you only need to know where you got something and what you did with it. You don't have an end-to-end picture. No single entity has an end-to-end picture of where this avocado came from, where it bounced along the way, and ultimately where it landed, right? And so there's value to every participant if they were to know those types of details. Obviously, some of the pricing and some of those need to, remain kind of shrouded from, the public visibility, but understanding all of the hops that your avocado went on, it's important to the consumer and to the farmer.
Well, one of the things that I'd always like to know is, how many units of fill in the blank fell off the back of the truck from source to destination. And I'm assuming that implementing some type of blockchain and logistics in the logistics management side of it would actually help reduce that shrink or that loss significantly, because if everything has a barcode and it's tracked, well, then it's a lot harder to make it disappear.
Yeah, and that's, the same is true with the authenticity. It also minimizes any falsification, right? So there's...
You're not importing a bunch of stuff from China and saying it's, made in Florida.
Right. If you haven't watched the show Rotten, you need to. Not because you necessarily work in the food industry, but because you happen to enjoy food. And I do too, but it's interesting how, this adulteration of the food supply chain is rampant. And wherever there's money to be made, somebody is going to try to cheat. And blockchain does have the ability to kind of remove some of that by proving this went from here to there to there.
Okay, so we talked a lot about supply chain logistics, specifically with the food industry. Now, how about let's look at some other type of industries and businesses and see kind of basic use cases on how that would happen. So maybe healthcare, if that's one, another one of them, or something else. Why don't you go ahead and lead off there?
Well, think about, signing up for a new dentist or new doctor. You have to fill out the same details every single place, every single time, right? And if you find out that you don't like that doctor and you go to try another doctor, you have to fill out the same details and same documents. And it takes, 5 or 10 minutes each time. And if you're going through multiple doctors, or if you move and you have to change all of your service providers, it just becomes a pain. So I do believe blockchain offers a promise of me as a consumer owning my data, have it in the blockchain or off-chain with references on the blockchain, but decide who I want to share that information with. In this case, I'm in control of my data, and I'm in control of who gets to see it. And so the blockchain is a mechanism by which those different parties could participate.
So theoretically, you could share all of your information with specific people, reducing the burden on you and improving the accuracy. Not to mention, both of your doctors will know what meds you're on, and hopefully, you won't have a heart attack because one doctor didn't know something that you were taking, and the other one prescribed you something that, bad day for everyone.
Well, and I think if your electronic medical record is there, there's conceivably a listing of what medications you might currently be on, and so any interplay. If a doctor needs to prescribe you something else, they might already know because you're saying, no, this is my data and I'm letting you share it as a trusted service provider without all of the rigmarole of having to, keep every single service provider up to date with every single change. That's one healthcare use case. But again, within healthcare, there's also a pretty large supply chain, right? The testing of new drugs is not an insignificant effort. There's a very high failure rate of drugs or biomedical devices that don't make it through the various stages of trial that the FDA requires, and that's huge cost. And so, blockchain could be used to keep track of these studies, all of the patients that are involved in the studies, the results of the testing that they're doing while on, an experimental drug. All of those records could be really consolidated and made available to the right parties who should see it: FDA, the clinical research organization, the physicians who are actually participating and running these tests. So again, it's a way to share data across multiple parties. I think there's a lot of opportunity to speed the velocity by which new drugs or new treatments come to market.
And again, you don't get the that notion of these drugs being bad and hurting people and then disappearing and stuff. You have accountability there. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
I'm not saying I'm a conspiracy theorist or anything, but you have heard everyone has their aunt has talked about something that her friend went through or something along the way. With that said, so we talked about some use cases here. One of the things that I know a lot of people are very interested in is, okay, we're consolidating all this information. We're making sure this information is accurate. Now, what do we do with all this information besides just let it sit there? Well, analytics. I mean, that is a major part of business nowadays, and it continues to grow and it continues to provide insights and actionable information for the business. Now, with that being said, can we use all that information on blockchain and provide some type of actionable intelligence for the business?
So I think the answer will ultimately be yes. Right now, with not a lot of enterprise applications being used in production on these blockchain networks, the availability of the data is a little bit less. And I think as we're moving relatively slowly away from kind of taking functionality that might exist within an enterprise footprint in the data center and putting more of that capability onto the blockchain, the companies that are interested in analytics, which are really all of them now, right? They still have their enterprise data sources. Those haven't gone away when they start to perform some function as a pilot on the blockchain. So I think the crux here is how do you combine really these enterprise, kind of the classical data sources that enterprises are using today, and how do you blend them with the information that is now available on the blockchain? Because you're having visibility to participants in your ecosystem, whether that's a supply chain or if it's something else. You now have visibility to information you may not have had before. At this point, it's a very immature space. It could be people are taking copies of everything on the blockchain into their enterprise data warehouse and then doing their analysis that way. I know there are also several startups that are in that space as well. So as part of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, Smartbridge is getting involved in that discussion. There's an analytics working group that we participate with, and really trying to understand what is the best way from a standards and interoperability, as well as opportunity. Where are the best uses for kind of blending blockchain data with enterprise data, and the best mechanism to do that? It's coming. I don't think it's there yet.
So fair enough. So as more of these blockchain implementations go into production and they're actually start to generate business value and information, then that kind of analytics and those additional bolt-on or on top of technologies will start to come into play, and we'll be getting more business value out of them. But as of right now, it's still kind of, like you said, in its infancy, and there's nothing really tangible or actionable from that yet. And it's probably going to be several years, 5, 6, 7 years before we even start to see anything that would be comparable to the enterprise level analytics and business intelligence applications that we have now.
They're probably going to occur at around the same time. The businesses that are leaning forward enough to be thinking about how to use blockchain within their vendor partner ecosystem or with the consumers, they're also the ones who are thinking about analytics. And so analytics will be almost a requirement of any blockchain implementation that they'll be pursuing. If they can't harness the data that is available on the blockchain, I just don't see them pursuing blockchain as an option. So data and analytics is really kind of arm in arm with any new initiative, because of that whole test and measure type of innovation mindset that businesses are adopting.
Okay, so it'll grow organically together with more implementations of blockchain, data analytics, business intelligence will actually be part of that growth and part of those applications as they come up and they actually start providing value.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, with that being said, I like to ask my 2 questions to every subject matter expert that I get in on the podcast here. And that question number 1 is, what is one thing that you know that most others don't, but you think they should know?
So if I were to think about this in terms of a blockchain-oriented answer, I would say that it's not too late, right? Some people think they may have missed the boat because they didn't invest in Ethereum when it was $100 or Bitcoin when it was under 5,000 or whatever. And that's not the point here. The point is that blockchain as a technology has some significant benefits that are just beginning to really be realized in the enterprise space. And so it's not too late. And I think the best antidote to that is learn. Right? It's read a lot. It's listen a lot. It also is to dabble. I think it's important. If Gartner says that 90% of blockchain activities in the next several years are going to be proofs of concept, that's okay, right? It's okay to pilot something before you go all in on it. And so I think that's important.
All right. That actually leads into my second question very well. And blockchain, maybe not blockchain specific, just in general, what's the most important thing you've learned in the past year?
So I think blockchain is a piece of the answer, but I guess a broader answer is that the technology space continues to evolve at breakneck pace, right? It continues to speed, and the change of that change is accelerating, right? So businesses can't sit still. They can't sit back and just say, we're going to wait for all of this to shake out, and we'll be a sort of fast follower. I'm okay with being a fast follower, but it can't be. We're not going to do anything until we have to do everything, because it's too late at that point. So I think the most important thing that I've learned is just the need to continue to innovate, even if those innovations don't necessarily turn into something that is production ready. I think the kind of fostering that innovation type of a mindset is extremely important for businesses today, because if they don't, they won't be a business tomorrow.
Fair enough. If I remember correctly, and I'll have to check with with the producers, but I think we have a podcast called Adapt or Die, which specifically talks about the need to adapt and take in new technology and use new technologies quickly and not sit there. It's not the businesses of old. It's not, you take 50 years and then you adopt a new process. This is, we're talking about exponential change, and it keeps growing and it keeps changing at that exponential rate. Anyway, with that said, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you, Matthew, for coming out. We appreciate your time. And for all of you listeners out there, if you could give us a like and a share wherever you found us. This is a Smartbridge podcast, transforming IT. Have a good day.
Thank you.